Okay, let's talk about it. We are tackling one of the toughest professional questions we all face. Is it time to quit my job? I mean, it's a huge decision, right? And it's so often clouded by fear and uncertainty. But what if we could actually approach it strategically? Let's break it down.
In this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. So often we tell ourselves we're staying for stability, for security. But what if that's not the real story? What if we're actually just choosing stagnation, simply because we're afraid to make a move? That's the core tension we're going to explore today.
Falling out of love with your job, it rarely happens overnight. It's not some big, sudden explosion. It's more like a slow, emotional withdrawal. Think of it as this gradual process where the bond between you and your work just quietly breaks, even while you're still showing up every day.
And this is where a critical shift happens. Your energy moves from working the work, building, creating, really contributing, to working the system. You're not focused on making an impact anymore, you're just focused on surviving. All your energy gets poured into self-protection. Does that sound at all familiar?
And here's the really tricky part. We get so good at rationalizing this stuff. We tell ourselves it's just being pragmatic. Oh, the market's tough, or I've just invested too much time here to leave now. But so often, this is really just fear disguised as logic. It's a self-betrayal that ends up hurting our own growth and, the company we're still a part of.
So how do you know? How do you know if it's just a bad week or if something more fundamental has actually broken? We tend to ignore the signs because leaving can feel like admitting failure. But recognizing the truth isn't failure, it's strategy. So let's look at 5 key signals that your psychological contract with your job is over, even if you're still technically employed.
Okay, sign number 1. And this is a big one. Look, every job requires you to stretch and adapt. That's totally normal, it's healthy growth. But there is a line. And you're in the danger zone when the role starts to chip away at your integrity, when you find yourself justifying behavior that you would never, ever accept in your personal life.
Here's a really simple test to just cut through all the noise. Imagine a close friend described your exact situation to you. What would you tell them? Seriously, would you tell them to stick it out? Or would you say that the trade-offs just aren't worth it? Answering that question for someone else can be incredibly revealing.
All right, sign number 2 is all about your motivation. That impulse to just quit, it's often driven by pure emotion. But making a huge decision in that state, it's risky. See, escaping what you dislike is not the same thing as moving toward what you actually value. If you act too quickly, you can land right in what's called a rebound role, a new job that has the exact same old problems.
And this is the crucial point right here. Are you being pushed out by frustration, or are you being pulled towards something better? Pulled by a desire for new learning or a bigger impact or more autonomy. A move that's based on a pull is strategic. A move based on a push, well, that's just reactive.
Now, the third sign asks you to kind of reframe the whole idea of a job. Think of it this way. Roles aren't meant to be marriages. They're missions. And every single mission has a lifespan. Eventually, that learning curve flattens out and your work shifts from creating something new to just maintaining the status quo.
So you have to ask yourself directly, looking at your role right now, what are you actively building? What are you really, truly learning? What are you empowered to actually change? If the answers to those questions don't come easily, your mission might just be complete. And remember, the real danger isn't leaving too early. It's staying long after the work has stopped helping you grow.
Okay, this one can be a little subtle. It's when your main contribution at work becomes pointing out what's wrong. You spend your days naming problems that you no longer feel like you have the power or maybe even the will to actually fix. Cynicism just becomes your default setting.
You're basically no longer in the arena, building and creating solutions. You've moved to the sidelines. You've become a bystander. And if you've really tried to make things better and the system just doesn't care, that's a huge signal of a structural misalignment that you probably can't fix from the inside.
And now, the final sign. This is when the job stops being just a job. Look, chronic stress is completely different from a short-term challenge. It's when the people closest to you, your family, your friends, are consistently getting the worst version of you. When your health, your relationships, and your fundamental sense of who you are being consumed by work, well, the role isn't stretching you anymore, it's breaking you.
Okay. So what happens if those signs are really ringing true for you? When the pain gets that real, the first impulse is just to get out, right? But that can be a trap. Before you even think about drafting that resignation letter, there's a really crucial step. You got to do the inner work.
The whole goal here is to gain some insight before you exit, so you don't just change offices but end up repeating the exact same patterns.
So here's a practical 4-step checklist to guide you. First, audit yourself. What's your part in this situation? Own it now so you don't carry that same baggage to your next job. Second, you have to identify the type of burn you're feeling. We'll dig into that in a second. Third, give your leaders a chance to respond. Have you clearly told them what you need to succeed? And finally, run a stress test. Can you realistically handle 6 months of financial and emotional uncertainty? Be honest with yourself.
Let's just zoom in on step 2 for a moment. Identify the burn. This is so critical. Are you bored because you're under-challenged? Are you bruised because you feel devalued and unseen? Or are you truly burned out because you are completely overwhelmed? Each one of those requires a totally different solution, and knowing which one applies to you is absolutely key to making the right next move.
So, if you've done all that inner work and the decision is still to leave, we enter the final phase, how to quit well. The way you leave a job says just as much about your character as how you perform in it. So let's talk about finishing with real integrity.
This is your final impression, you know? Don't use your exit interview to settle a bunch of scores. Instead, be a pro. Close your files meticulously. Hand over your projects with care and set your colleagues up for success. And if you do offer feedback, make sure it's constructive and actually designed to help the organization get better. And so, we land right back here at the final, most critical question. It's the one you need to ask yourself with total, brutal honesty. Are you staying out of purpose, or are you staying out of fear? Are you rooted in a sense of contribution, or in a fear of the unknown? You spend a third of your life at work. You owe it to yourself not to spend it in a room where you no longer belong.